Okay, so today's speaker is Noel Potter. He's an emeritus professor. What that means is he retired with such distinction that we gave him the title of emeritus. That's code for old fart. And Noel still comes to work every day. He doesn't teach, he doesn't supervise any undergraduate major, but he's still dedicated to his work. And as my wife says, professors never retire, they just stop getting paid. And so Noel was here in 1972 when I was a little boy, 8 years old. And he went up in an airplane and was able to document the effect of this flood from Agnes in 1972. So take it away, Noel.
Oh, that thing. Which one goes ahead?
That one, yeah. Yep.
Okay. Good. I feel a little bit like an antique. Having been around that long. But I came to Dickinson in '69, and 3 years later, what is still the flood of record for this part of Pennsylvania occurred. And there was I had no idea that I was going to experience the flood of record. In fact, I went out and started taking a few pictures. It was raining hard. And taking some pictures of soil being washed off the fields. This was before no-till farming became prominent. They would plow the fields and harrow them, and it was early in the season, and so there was lots of soil to wash away. And so it turns out that as things evolve, you will see the water rose higher and higher and higher. And I went around the bridges as far as I could. I couldn't go north of the Wagoner's Gap Bridge because there was water going over it. I couldn't go south of Mount Holly Gap because there was water over the road near what used to be Deer Lodge, just south of Mount Holly Springs. And so I took pictures. And then as things evolved, I realized this was a major event, and I went and saw my good friend Ken Laws, who taught for many years in the physics department. And Ken flew an airplane. And so I said, Ken, how about let's go up flying. And as soon as the clouds lifted enough, we did. And we got pictures like this. I need to say one other thing, and that is I've shown this talk, been a bunch of pictures probably 30 times or more over the years at the 5th anniversary, the 10th anniversary, the 25th anniversary, and so on. And in all those years until this year, I never found myself saying, oh gosh, this could happen again anytime. This could happen again anytime. And all of a sudden this year, I've done several talks earlier this summer. All of a sudden this year, I found myself listening to the news, and well, there was Kentucky, floods in Kentucky. There were floods in the southwest of the U.S. And I won't hit them all, but floods in Pakistan and floods now in Puerto Rico. And all of a sudden I'm finding myself saying, well, yeah, maybe it could occur again pretty soon. I can't tell you when, but think about that a little bit as we go along. So here we go. Oh, I just pushed the right hand button and nothing happened there. So I've set you up for a little think about it a moment. Here are a couple of houses. They may not be your style. You would prefer some other style, But, would you consider buying one of these houses if it was your style? Nice place. But be careful, because too many buttons. There are the two houses in the lower right, and you've already seen the upper left picture. They're underwater. They were underwater. And I covered up in the other picture, I covered up the sign that says roadway subject to flooding. This is just out northeast of Carlisle, off of Wolf Bridge Road. And if you know the area, you go out toward the turnpike, and there's a Sheets out there halfway to the turnpike. If you turn left at the Sheets, the stoplight, you would get to that bridge, and that bridge has been changed now. You can see it right there. The bridge is now a big concrete bridge, and in fact, several of the bridges I will show you have changed over the years. Okay, so it was already a wet spring. In fact, 3 days before Agnes, this is what the playground at Latorte School looked like, down near southeast of the center of town, near Latorte School, and where Molly Pitcher is buried. So Agnes started way down in, oh dear. Yeah, I'm going through this problem.
There you are.
There.
You're back.
I'm mixed between pointers and movers. Started way down in the Caribbean and eventually came aground in western Florida. And at about that point, it became a hurricane. The dotted line in southeastern part of the country is hurricane. That means bigger than a certain amount of wind. And then it got further north up toward us, and it actually slowed down so that by the time we had it here, you'd never know that there was a lot of wind. There was hardly any wind at all, but it rained like a dickens. And perhaps it's important that it went out to sea near the south end of the Chesapeake Bay and went out to sea for a while, and it probably picked up another load of water, and then it came in over northern Pennsylvania, and it just dumped and dumped and dumped. And I have not gone, you can go today and find gussied up maps of what the precipitation was and all the rest. But I've taken a map from back at the time, shortly after the flood, that was put together, a report on it. And I colored in orange the areas that got more than 10 inches of rain. And you don't need to know a lot of geography to know that that roughly corresponds to the Susquehanna River Basin. And we got lots of water. And in fact, down at the bottom, Harrisburg got over 12 inches of rain in 24 hours. There were a whole mess of places that got 16 inches over several days. And think about that. Every square inch of the area got that much water. And where's it going to go? It's going to run off. And this is what it was like in Carlisle. The upper right image is, these are both on Southwest Street. And the upper one, if you look over your right shoulder, you could see the cemetery where Molly Pitcher is buried. It's right behind Faye's Country Kitchen. I know I'm talking, some of the people don't know the geography of this area well yet. And so I'll try to fill in a little bit. Okay. All right. I only pushed once and I went twice. Here's Southwest Street. It's on the way to go to the Walmart, if you've been to Walmart yet. And Walnut Bottom Road. an area of houses that were built relatively recently before this, before Agnes occurred. And these houses are built in an area, as many are around here, an area of limestone, what we call karst topography, with shallow depressions, not like depressions in the landscape that are sort of long ago remnants of sinkholes. And these depressions, if you get too much water, they fill up. And indeed, that's what's going on in this picture. If your house is in it, oh dear. Oh, I push once and it goes 2 or 3 times. I don't get this. There. The U.S. Geological Survey's main gauging station on the Susquehanna River is on City Island in Harrisburg. And they have marked the various floods. And Agnes is the uppermost one, the red arrow pointing down. There was the next in size was way back in 1936, when there was ice on the river and the ice dammed it so that the water rose high. And then Lee, and in 1996, there was a fairly large flood. And if those of you who know the area know that in 1996, the 2 spans of the Walnut Street Bridge, a big metal span bridge, were washed away. They survived Agnes, and they were washed away because there was ice on the river in 1996, and the ice was high enough that it just pushed 2 spans of the bridge away. We'll see where it was in a moment. So, darn it. I don't understand why this thing goes 3 pictures when I push once. It just did it. Why is it doing this?
Why don't you call for next slide?
You can call next slide.
Is there okay. Go next. Next again. One more. One more. One more. There. Thank you. So what I did, as I described, was went around taking pictures of soil washing off fields, and gradually I saw water, as in the lower picture here, rising beneath the bridges. And the picture in the upper left, I took afterward. I went back to get the quote before picture, but it's really after. We know it's after because of the what looks like a undershirt hanging from under the bridge, because the water got up to higher than the bridge. In fact, you look carefully, you can see a couple kids on bicycles up in the upper left picture on the bridge. The water eventually got about to their heads on the bridge. It's hard to believe, so I'll show you. Next. So there's the bridge with water all the way up, and then the lower picture afterward, and that's my old Ford sitting there for scale. And that's why I couldn't go far north or south of town. Next. Oh, see, you're having trouble too. Back there. And now there's the bridge and the little Mennonite chapel on the other side over there. And in the distance, that busy highway is the Miracle Mile, or there are a number of names for it. It's the area out near the entrance to the turnpike, where there are a lot of truck stops. Okay, next. So a view to get some location for those of you who are not used to the area. I'm just gonna go up here and point. Carlisle, Harrisburg, and here is Conneduguinet Creek, a creek north of Carlisle that goes eastward to the Susquehanna. Eventually, we will see Yellow Bridges Creek, which flows along the south side of the valley toward the Susquehanna too. And we will see a bunch of bridges north of Carlisle on the ground. And then we will come back and look aerial at some of these bridges, go to Harrisburg, north of it, fly down the Susquehanna River looking out one side or the other, and then fly back along the Yellow Bridges looking at a few places. Okay, now go. Go. Right down the other side of town. In fact, the cemetery where Molly Pitcher is right here. The square is up above there. And there's water from Latort Creek, our little beautiful local creek. Now what's happening? Next. Oh, the next is already there. This is the Pennsylvania Turnpike. And the turnpike was closed west of the Carlisle exit. Nobody could go west of just out here northeast of the town because Conneduguinet Creek down at the bottom flooded enough that water went right out over the turnpike. I don't think I've ever heard of the turnpike being closed because of flooding again. Next. So, and northwest of Carlisle, here's the road to Wagoner's Gap. Carlisle is down to the right. We're looking south, water going over the bridge. Next. More of the same, and this is Long's Gap Road, and the facility down there is Carlisle's water treatment plant. That's where our water comes from, still does. And you can see that it's threatened. There are a whole mess of cars and people down on this side of, and those are Dickinson College summer school students and probably some other people from town as well who are sandbagging, trying to save the water treatment plant. Next. And this is Route 34 going northeast of town called Startstaff Road. And same sort of thing. The Conneduguinet usually flows between those two rows of trees. Next. And then you've already seen this one, this Wolf Bridge Road. Next. And this is the one that we saw, the water rising by the bridge. There's the bridge, little Mennonite chapel. Okay. And Latort Creek out there on the left side, flowing toward us from Carlisle somewhere up in the fog. And notice, here's the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Everybody's going west and they can't go any further. They're being made to get off here. And these guys can't get on. Turnpike. Next. So now we've gone to Harrisburg. And in the distance is the big Susquehanna River. And we are north of downtown, well north of downtown Harrisburg now. And a marker that I believe is still there, but not under the business name at the time. You recognize the orange roof? Howard Johnson. It was a Howard Johnson restaurant at the time. Next. And this is Interstate 81 being built over the Susquehanna River. We're looking from the west shore toward the east. And in 1982, they had not finished this part of this 81 yet. Here's the exit that would go down Front Street to Harrisburg. All underwater. Next. And for those that know the area, right up. There is the Zembo Mosque. Gonna be from Harrisburg if you know these things. But look at the blocks and blocks with water. Next. And it was about this time in my slideshow in whatever it was, the 25th anniversary of the flood, I was asked to show slides in Harrisburg. And a whole bunch of people came that had been through the flood. And among the people that came was the guy who had been the mayor of Harrisburg at the time, Harold Swenson. For those local, it was before that guy that was mayor forever, Mayor Reed. Harold Swenson. And Swenson told an interesting story. He told of some people who were in a place like this, and they knew that the water was rising, and they went out and got a rental truck, say U-Haul or whatever, some rental truck, and planned ahead, and they backed it up to the front porch, and they got some people to help load all kinds of furniture into the truck, and the water was rising around the wheels of the truck, and they're ready to go, and the guy gets in, and he's so excited, he breaks the key off in the truck, and they couldn't start it. And the truck ended up being flooded. Okay, next. And we've come a little further downriver now, and that's the governor's bench, which had not been built too many years before. And in fact, Governor's shop was taken out in a boat. We have pictures of him being taken out in a boat, and he ended up going to Camp Hill on the West Shore, and he ended up staying there. He liked it better, staying there for the rest of his administration. Governor's Mansion. And probably you're focusing on this, which is a fire on 2nd Street. Next. And think about this a little bit. You've got a fire, but here's the flood back to there somewhere. So where are the fire trucks? They're way up there. And they ended up getting, say, the National Guard or somebody with a big truck, high truck, to take the hoses in. And you can see that there are some firemen down in the adjacent buildings squirting onto this fire, but it's not a good place to have a fire. And if you haven't shut off the electricity, water and electricity don't go good together. Okay, next. Oh, we've come further down now. We're looking at the West Shore instead of the Harrisburg side. And for those who know the area, this is the Market Street Bridge, and this is the Walnut Street Bridge. And that's Lemoyne over there. Some people know this is the bottleneck. And City Island is just down here. So if you go to a baseball game in Harrisburg, you go to City Island, and if you're coming home, you probably come this way. Except there's water going over the bridge. We'll see it later on the ground. Next. So we've switched back to the east side, and this is part of downtown Harrisburg. This is Interstate 83, the South Bridge, as the locals call it. These are railroad bridges. This is Market Street Bridge. Next. And so here's Interstate 83. If one is going to downtown Harrisburg, one often goes this way, goes off where it says 2nd Street exit, and comes down under, and whoops, you're underwater. Now, see that row of little white dots? They're cement mixer trucks that belong to Pensy Supply, and they did not get moved. And so the water rose, and all you're seeing is the big tub on the back of the truck. Next. So South Bridge, we're looking down to Steelton, keep going. Oh, next. Hilton, keep going. And here's Harrisburg International Airport. The ends of the runway tip up a little. And in those days, the terminal was not very big. That's the terminal. With a little appendage that sticks out where the airplanes would pull up. It's all been rebuilt. It's probably not a good idea to have your airport where you can't get to it in an emergency. But that's the circumstance. Next. So now we switch back to the West Shore, and Yellow Bridges Creek goes between this double row of trees. Here's a bridge. For those who know the area, that's New Cumberland. And the airport over there is a second airport called Capital City Airport that doesn't have big commercial flights, but lots of the local flyers fly out of there. Go. And now up Yellow Bridges Creek to a place called Williams Grove. And for the locals, if you don't know Williams Grove, you probably know Ashcombe, which is one of the major plant places in the area. Greenhouse. Williams Grove is a trailer park. And I've counted, and it's on the order of 50 trailers that are in there. And virtually every one of them, water up within them. Imagine, how do you clean up afterwards? This doesn't work easily. Next. And a little further upstream, this is Pennsylvania Route 74, goes through town, it's the one from Wagoner's Gap, and it goes down to Dillsburg, off there in the distance. The Yellow Bridges Creek next. And a little further up, this is Boiling Springs. And there's this lovely lake at Boiling Springs, and the tavern was closed. Boiling Springs, and the creek is right down here. And notice there's some mud going into the lower end of the lake. The lake is spring fed. Mud going into the lower end of the lake. And what's going on is the muddy water is coming down a mill race from a dam now removed. It was up here, and it's squirting a little bit of mud into the lower end of the lake. Next. And at the time that the flood occurred, Pittsburgh Plate Glass was building a very large plate glass plant, PPG glass plant down here against South Mountain. It was being constructed at that time. It's over 50 years old. It's still there. It's now been sold, and it belongs to an outfit called Vitro. But former PPG. And the thing of note here are two things. Yellow Bridges Creek, well over its banks here. But notice all these little ponds. All over the place. Those are karst ponds, where there's sinkhole ponds, like I described for Walnut Bottom Road, that filled up with water. Next. So there's the PPG plant. It was a little higher, but they ended up with plenty of water they had to deal with afterward. It wasn't operating yet. Next. And this is over Mount Holly Springs looking northeast. And the geography is a little tough to see here, but this is the road to Boiling Springs from Mount Holly Spring. The Yellow Bridges is out there beyond. Next. So after the flood, some students and I went around locally to try to make a map of the areas that were flooded. And so LaJort Creek and the Connequin, and here are some of these sinkhole ponds. One of them right at the end of West Street, not far from, I can't think of it now, the Todd home. It wasn't hard to tell where the high water mark was weeks afterward, because sticks and leaves had floated to the high point. And there were often things hanging in the trees from the water way up there. I want to say toilet paper, but it's more likely some other paper things hanging in the trees next. And similarly, we did it for Mount Holly Springs, and there's the glass plant. And notice, U.S. Geological Survey had done what they called a quick and dirty map. I could teach you to do this in 10 minutes from a topographic map, what would be flooded. And you can quarrel over the details, but not too bad. And of course, they didn't know about this when they did that a few years earlier. Next. So, a few more. South of town, I commute on this road south of Mount Holly Springs every morning and afternoon, coming from where I live down south of town. Here's what it looked like at the height of the flood. Next. So I told you we'd come back to this view of the Market Street Bridge and the Walnut Street Bridge and the bottleneck. And one obviously couldn't get out on these bridges, but I drove over there and figured out a way to come around and get on this railroad track and stand right there somewhere and look at these bridges. Let's look. Next. So here's what they look like later in the summer. Market Street Bridge, notice it's well above the river. City Island and Walnut Street Bridge. And a bunch of school buses. Well, those school buses were right in there somewhere. Not during the flood. They've been put back after the flood. But lots of water. Water over the bridges. And it's that bridge with the trusses that lost 2 sections in 1996. Okay, let's go again. And some local things. Some sinkholes opened up. I don't have a picture of the big one, but this is right out at the end of Dreher or Whitworth Hall, right here on campus. And a few blocks away, think about this. There was a stairwell there with cinder blocks around the side of it. People's basements flooded. Water rose. People's basements flooded. They called the fire department and said, come and pump out my basement. And think about this. Now you pump out the basement, but there's still water in the soil outside. What's that water doing? It's got lots of pressure. And in this case, it pushed in the stairwell. In a couple of cases around town, it pushed in basement walls. And that's not good for the building up above. The fire department's caught on to this fairly quick. And I recently heard a talk by some guys that dealt with the fire department end of the flood. And they said, we got hundreds of calls saying, come and pump my basement out. And eventually got to the point we would say, is anybody injured? They'd say no, and they'd hang up because it was just too many. They couldn't do it. Okay, so now we want to switch a little. Now, next. Many of you know that for a long time, I've had friends at the Pennsylvania Geological Survey. In fact, I found a spouse there. But soon after I came to Carlisle, I went over to see some of them and got some good friends. Among them, Sam Root, who did the geologic map of many areas around here, but the Carlisle and Mechanicsburg areas, hanging right out around the corner down in the middle. So I had lots of friends. The Geological Survey for years had been, they go back to the early 1800s. They're a very early Pennsylvania agency. And for years, including when I came, they had been in offices in an old, small building on the hill next to the Capitol in Harrisburg. And at some point, just before Agnes, months before, someone from the Attorney General's office said, we'd like to be in that building. And you can imagine who wins with the Attorney General and the Pennsylvania Geological Survey. And the survey was told they had to move. And the place that was found, the state rents facilities like this. The place that was found was on that floor of that building. If any of you, and it's in Harrisburg on Cameron Street. If any of you know Harrisburg at all, have been there a little bit, just down beyond the building, right about in there somewhere, is the Appalachian Brewing Company. Now you've got ones nodding their heads, have to see. So they protested. The head of the Geological Survey, Art Sokolow, protested, but it didn't do any good. He said, we're being moved to a floodplain. Didn't do any good. You're gonna go there. And they got moved 2 or 3 months before Agnes. And in fact, by the time of Agnes, the library had still not been unpacked from boxes that were sitting in the place where eventually the library would end up on shelves. At any rate, they were here. And notice these slicks. Just upstream along Paxton Street or Cameron Street, Paxton Creek, was a plant that had used oil of some kind, and they had it in an outdoor lagoon. And the water rose, and of course, oil floats on water, and so all this oil went down. And when the water went down, it left a coating of oil over many things in and on the building. Now, next. So here's the setting. Interstate 83, the South Bridge. There's those cement mixer trucks. Cameron Street goes up there, and just upstream from it is the State Street Bridge. That's where the previous picture was taken. And we'll now look the other way. I'll go. And this is looking up Cameron Street from the State Street Bridge. And you can see with the bus, what the water. Well, the Geological Survey is right behind it. Next. So here's during and then after, and there are all kinds of people in there, including a whole bunch of us from Dickinson who went over to help. And people are there trying to help salvage some things. Next. So there they are as the water came down. This is Geological Survey took these, and there's the director at the time, Art Sokolow. Any of you know Dickinson for a few years. His son, Carl Sokolow, was the college photographer for a number of years. And Carl is still around. Art is long gone. He looks happy, but he apparently wasn't. I'm told that he went in with great trepidation. Okay, next.
Can you go back, Noel?
What?
Is that oil on the building on the lower right?
Yup. That's where the oil there primarily, which is where the top of the flood was. And that's oil. All those streaks. Yes, thanks. Next. So, somebody's office desk looks rather undisturbed, but notice the mud on it. And a typewriter. This is before computers. A typewriter. And some of you at least have heard of IBM Selectrics. There's one. They were just taken outside and hosed off. And that's not the worst of it. Keep going. And here's the library. There were a few things on the shelves. A couple of boxes had been opened, and in fact, I went in and with Pete Wilshues and tried to salvage a couple of things, and among others, we got out a copy of the 1852 original Geology of Pennsylvania, 2 volumes by Henry Darwin Rogers. And we got out a bound set of all of the Field Conference of Pennsylvania guidebooks that go back to the 1930s. And they're kind of collector's items to find old things. We got those. And then the Geological Survey for years has been the place that well drillers, drilling for water mainly, are expected to report what they drilled through. How far was it to bedrock? What was the rock like? Where was the water table and things like that? And they, in those days, filled out 3x5 cards and submitted them. And the survey had drawers and drawers of these cards. And we said, this is too valuable to not lose. They'd all been flooded. And in fact, they were in metal drawers this long. And in places, if the drawer was full, the paper expanded and the drawer front had popped off. Metal drawers. We salvaged them all. We put them in garbage bags, big ones, just randomly. And they came over to Dickinson. And we had learned by then, by going online or reading, actually not online because it wasn't online, but we went to the library. And I went and talked to Joan Beckel or somebody and said, what do you do in a flood for paper? And there were some papers on the Florence flood that occurred a few years before in Italy. And the main thing you do is freeze them until you can salvage them. And so we brought bags of these things over to Dickinson, and I went over to food service. It was summer. Freezers weren't full. And I said, can we put these in your freezer? And if you're a health nut, today you'd have a heart attack if you knew that a bunch of flood stuff was going into a food freezer. But they went in and I could go over and pull out a bunch every day. And I had them we still have a rock breaker, don't we? The hydraulic one. I took the chisel points out of the rock breaker and put 2 plywood sheets in and went like this. And it was like putting the paper through a rimmer. We did the same with the books, and the water came squishing out, and we preserved and dried out all of those records, and they're now online. Other people have put them online. But next, library's a mess. What do you do with it? It ends up that it was thrown out, front end loaders put it in trucks, and it went to a dump. It was the finest geologic library, especially of old things in Pennsylvania. So, wooden chairs floated. Somebody's manuscript floated. Next. The camera stuff. You'll recognize a carousel tray, for example, and some other things. Overhead projectors. Here's the library. Darn it. I'm trying to relate it to people now. We're almost there. Next. And geologists take notes on maps. And there's Sam Root with the maps. There's his field notes from quadrangles that he'd been mapping. And he laid them out to dry. Next. And in case you don't recognize it, that's an X-ray diffraction unit. And I watched somebody take a hose and go like this. And what do they cost? Tens of thousands of dollars. They're probably more like hundreds of thousands nowadays. Next. And up near the farm show, there's a big parking lot. And they put trailers in the parking lot, and many people were put up there for a long time. Trailer City for displaced people. And remember, next one. We got one of these t-shirts for our son when he was quite small at GSA. Okay, that's it. Thanks. Room for questions? What's the deal?
Yeah, we've got time for questions.
Okay,
I have a question on.
yeah,
So on yesterday's field trip, we went down to South Middleton Park. And we were looking at the yellow breaches and
yeah.
the question came up. Now I know the bridge has been replaced since, but the question came up of. In time of flood, will that bridge on Park Drive? Will the water come up beyond that bridge?
No, I don't think it will. I have seen water up to the point that it flooded the pavilions, just barely,
Okay,
which is my measure. It's not Agnes, but there's still a long ways to go to get up the bridge.
yeah.
That particular one, there's lots of others that you saw.
Sure.
Yeah,
I'm wondering what the timeline was like, for how long did it take to completely restore those big, parts of infrastructure that were destroyed, like the turnpike and the airport? How long until those were functional?
how long were they flooded?
Yes,
It was several days. The water went down fairly quickly. But it's the things that are flooded inside the buildings. Some of the bridges were perfectly fine to drive across again, as long as the water got below the surface that you drive across. But if it's buildings, it's another matter. I don't know whether I've answered or not. The water went down reasonably quickly. Somebody else is.
How was Dickinson College's campus like directly affected by it? Was it?
Not much. Interestingly, we were in pretty good shape. In those days, there was a fairly robust summer school. Several hundred students. And they rallied. They set up tables in the Holland Union in front of the information desk near the entrance. And they were receiving phone calls and telling what roads were open and things like that. And most interesting, I said the turnpike was closed. Lots of people that were heading west had no place to go. They were sent down to Dickinson, and Dickinson put up something like 150 or so people in, I think, Dreyer, one of the bigger dorms. And indeed, I was told, I didn't experience it, that there was a concert violinist among these people. He did a concert for the people that were stuck in the dorm. Nice little town.
You showed the picture of the Dickinson students sandbagging, trying to protect the water treatment plant.
Yeah,
Did we lose the water treatment plant?
no. Apparently, if we did, it came back reasonably quick. I lived in town and I don't remember my water going off or being told to boil.
Well, there's a question on YouTube coming in from Alex Purplage. He's asking about what preventative measures have been implemented for future events. Is there any, can you speak to anything locally that has been done to kind of prevent flood damage?
Well, use the word flood, you can't prevent the flood.
The damage.
So it's fix the buildings or whatever. I don't know of many things. In Harrisburg, there's an area just along the river, not far from where you get off 83, not far from downtown, called Shipoke. And Shipoke was flooded. It's always flooded when there's a flood. And many of the buildings after Agnes were either rebuilt or lifted up, and they are now on stilts. And you park on the ground floor and you live up on the second story, which presumably is above at least many floods.
It was one of these pictures, wasn't it?
Pardon?
A lot of beach houses like that.
Yeah, until their legs get washed out from under them.
Yeah. The hydrographs, no, when I was in a class, civil engineering class, Penn State, probably a couple of years
Yeah.
afterwards, and that was they were doing stochastic hydrology, and so we looked at the data from flooding, I forget which area, but the plots of the hydrographs before Agnes plotted on a nice Weibull curve, and you could use that for prediction of,
Oh, for
what maximum.
what year flood, how many?
Yeah, and they had almost 100 years worth of data at that point.
Yeah,
The
and this one is kind of out there.
it was like a 10,000 year event, and it was not possible to evaluate, to think that was part of the Weibull curve.
No, but it says this is a major event. It's sort of out there on the curve compared to most.
Right, it was suggesting that certainly that there was a different population than what the normal flood was. And
Can you go and find near the beginning, the one with the USGS gauge? Yeah, click on that one. USGS gauge.
yeah, that didn't look as dramatically different as I would have thought.
This is the one that they said, the term I heard was 200 or 250 year flood.
Yeah.
But it may have been a lot more. It doesn't mean you can't have another one next year. I mean,
Right.
flipping coins, you can get 3 or 4 heads or tails in a row. Well, look. 3 years later.
Right.
72, 75. It's one of the major floods of record.
Right.
Not quite as bad as Agnes, but
Very significant.
a big flood.
Yeah.
Oh, Ben,
So Lee and Eloise and Agnes, they're all hurricane/tropical storms. Is that right?
I believe, yes.
And do you know of each of them? I mean, one of the things that's interesting is Agnes came up and then hooked back down around, so went offshore and then came back kind of against the normal
Well,
jet
yeah, it
stream.
came back in. My map showed that.
Yeah. So any idea, and maybe you don't, but any idea if that same meteorological pattern is what brought Eloise and Lee?
I'm not sure that it did.
Okay.
It makes me think of the one a few years ago that hit New Jersey and New York City,
Right.
where it was out and then it zapped in toward New Jersey and all hell broke loose.
Sandy?
Sandy.
Yeah, that's the one.
All right, thank you all. You didn't get enough pizza? Get us lights on your way out. Hope to see you next week.
Thank
Can I
you.
get a flight on my way out?
You can get the suit.